She is now the longest-serving party leader in the provincial legislature. And though she had hoped to land the top job in the last election, she's already brought enormous enthusiasm to her role as the leader of the opposition. It's only the third time in Ontario history that the NDP has held that standing at Queen's Park. Let's find out how they like it so far. Here's Andrea Horwath, leader of Her Majesty's Loyal Opposition and the MPP for Hamilton Centre. Nice to have you back here at TVO.
It's my pleasure, Steve.
At the risk of doing like a nerdy pop quiz off the top, do you know what happened 28 years ago today?
28 years ago today, I do not.
NDP won its first and only government.
Ah, very good.
This was the Bob Rae election 28 years ago today, so it feels kind of appropriate that you're here. Because you are no longer the leader of a small, hardy band of third-party members. You're the official...
Who punched above our weight regularly.
Okay. You're now the leader of the official opposition. And I wonder if you somehow see your mission differently now because of that.
I think the mission is the same. It's fighting for everyday people and making sure that we have a province where everybody can build a great life. So that will never change. That's where our values are, and that's what we fight for. But we have a hefty bench, if you will call it that. We've gone from, well, when I started, we didn't even have party status, and that was in 2004. And now we have 40 members, and we have official opposition. And so it helps us to fight for the things that people care about even stronger and harder each and every day.
Yeah, I think you've got the second largest caucus in your party's history, and with that, of course, comes added challenges, because they're not just a small group anymore, right? There's a lot of different voices in that caucus. How do you keep it all together?
Well, there are a number of different voices in the caucus, and we're proud of that. We have still 50% women, which is wonderful. With that increase in members as leader, I did, worry and have some concerns that we would lose our, 50-50 kind of makeup in terms of gender. But we also have people from all kinds of ethno-cultural and racial backgrounds and faith beliefs, and representing every part of the province. And so it's a group of 40 that are very, very reflective of Ontario. But one of the things that we all have in common is we're all New Democrats. And so we have a very positive atmosphere around our caucus table. Thus far, it's early days, but thus far everybody's taking this on with a real desire to remember who it is that we're there for.
This, again, is a bit of an odd question, but we're into an unprecedented situation here where the previous government, who's being attacked on a daily basis, can't really respond because they're no longer an officially constituted party in the legislature. They don't have enough seats. And it has occasionally fallen upon you to defend the previous government's record. Not on everything, but, things like the sex ed curriculum and green energy and, added resources for Indigenous education and those kinds of things, the basic income pilot, which the Tories killed, and so on. Does it ever feel awkward to find yourself in those circumstances?
Well, I mean, what we've often said is that the Liberals, there were some things that they did that we agreed with, but many things they did that we didn't agree with. And what we have now, though, is a government that's taking us from bad to worse. So where cap and trade was something we agreed on in terms of the big picture, we were concerned about some of the ways they implemented it. For example, there was a lack of transparency. We were concerned about not being able to measure effectiveness because of the lack of transparency, and we didn't see enough initiatives to help middle and low-income families transition to the costs that the cap and trade system would bring, particularly in places like Northern Ontario, where it's a harsher climate and a more difficult lifestyle.
But they did campaign on that, and they won, fair and square.
Oh, you mean the Conservatives?
Yeah.
Oh, no, absolutely. But we were talking about, the situation as where we're having to defend.
I see.
And so what we say is, look, we know that the government, the previous government, the Liberal government, didn't get it all right when it came to cap and trade. However, we do believe that having the biggest polluters pay the freight to the largest extent is the right way to go. Instead, we don't know what the new government's going to bring, but we think that it's going to put us in a worse situation where we're going to be paying more as families and individuals, and where our capacity, our ability to actually address our greenhouse gas emissions and our carbon footprint is going to be reduced. So we're going to pay more and have a more poisoned environment.
Do you think a new government's entitled to a honeymoon?
Well, I mean, whether they're entitled or not, that's the tradition. I mean, that seems to be what happens. People take a bit of a wait-and-see approach and give them time to get on their feet.
Did they get one, though?
I was going to say, having said that, I don't think they wanted one. They went in pretty hard-nosed and made some changes that I think are pretty concerning. And whether that's cap and trade, which we don't even know what the cost of is going to be, because all of those companies that now have useless, carbon, you're right, the credits, right? Who knows what's going to happen with all of that? But we have a school system that's just gone back with middle school and grade school kids having mass confusion around what's going to be taught when it comes to physical and health education.
We are going to get to that.
Yeah.
But the reason I asked about the honeymoon is that, of course, they were sworn in at the end of June. They brought the House back in July for a rare summer sitting. So I guess you're right in some respects. There was no sort of formal opportunity for a honeymoon because you guys were right back at it quickly. And I can't resist. We're going to show a little tape from the legislature because anyway. Sheldon, go.
Can you explain why your party's talk is cheaper than your buck of beer?
Not once did that member ask for a briefing on basic income security when he was the minister. Never once did he ask what a basic income pilot project would be extended to $17 billion.
The member for Don Valley East must come to order. The government side must come to order. The Premier will come to order.
Now, I know that was a Liberal member who provoked the minister in question and resulted in that big foofara, but it's gotten pretty hot in there pretty quickly. And I get that politics ain't beanbag, but do any of you feel any obligation to sort of lower the temperature and bring added civility to that place?
Well, I mean, I think that there's always been that expectation. I've certainly been there for many, many years, and I've never seen the tenor of the legislature fall to where it is currently or where it was when we broke.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, there's only one big difference at Queen's Park, and that's Doug Ford. And so whether he empowers his members to behave that way or not, that's I guess that's his to own and his to deal with. But what I can tell you is having ministers scream at you at the top of their lungs, having a premier scream at people at the top of his lungs and use language and accusations that are not true at all is a very disturbing thing. And of course, then that creates a reaction on our side of the house, and it becomes quite ugly. And it doesn't need to be that way, and it shouldn't be that way.
Can you give an example?
I'm sorry?
Can you give an example of where you think the Premier said something that was false in losing his temper at you guys in the House?
Oh, well, of course. I mean, he stood up and yelled at us and said, we're puppy haters, and we're veteran haters, and we're cop haters, and we're these haters, and we're those haters. I mean, it was ridiculous and silly, but if people tuned into that and thought, well, are they that? Is that what they? And we don't believe those things. But it's difficult for the speaker even to, as you saw in that clip, to get the government members and the premier to behave with decorum in the House. And for me, that's a troublesome thing. I mean, the House is a place where there should be an ability to, debate issues, debate policy, debate what the government is doing, hold the government to account. That's the job opposition does, without it dissolving into a fiasco, which is done too many times already.
Okay, let's move on to the sex ed curriculum. As you know, as everybody knows, the government has put a pause on things as it attempts to consult what it says will be the largest consultation in Ontario history on this. I know what your view is on this, but I do want to ask you whether or not, in its attempts to get what it thought was a more modern, more appropriate, safer for LGBTQ kids, et cetera, kind of sex ed curriculum into the classrooms, the previous government, with your support, I think, ran roughshod over the values of those who are more socially conservative and would have had some problem with some of what was in that new curriculum. You know what I'm getting at here?
I do know what you're getting at, and I'm not so sure that that's the case. What I do know happened is that the government was not ready to release the curriculum when they did. And they did it to change the channel on another scandal, which was the Sudbury by-election scandal. And so in rushing it out the door, I don't know that they did the final work that they needed to do in terms of communications, particularly communicating to those folks who had identified that there were some problems around how they could withdraw their children, for example, how there could be mitigating procedures or processes to protect their kids if they saw it that those kids needed protection from being exposed to something that they didn't believe in. And so again, I think one of the big problems that Kathleen Wynne Carquillan and the Liberals had is that they did more of what they did for political purposes as opposed to doing the right thing. And unfortunately, the curriculum, which had been worked on since the McGuinty days, and you know that, got shoved out the door in a way that created more chaos than necessary because the government was trying to change the channel from the Sudbury by-election, and that's a political reason for doing things instead of doing it for the right reasons, which was to update the curriculum.
I hear you, but does that then argue for, if you're suggesting it got rushed out the door, does that argue for a bit of a pause right now just to make sure that a broader swath of Ontarians are completely comfortable with whatever new direction may come?
Well, and I don't think the issue is the pause. I think the issue is the reversal, right? They're dragging the province backwards. If it were a matter of simply pausing as things are with the updated curriculum and then going out and saying, okay, this is the curriculum, let's have a discussion about where it's at. It's been 3 years. How are people feeling? How are those families feeling? I think that's legitimate. But to simply throw that curriculum to the wayside and then scramble to figure out what we put in place in the interim based on really based on the beliefs of a very small group of vocal social conservatives, which is who Mr. Ford really is, playing to in this
part of his coalition. That's the reality.
Well, I mean, it is the reality, but what about the vast majority of families and young people and kids particularly that need to have the tools that are available to keep them safe and to keep them kind of in an environment that is current and not one that's based in 1998. I mean, so a pause is one thing. That's not what's happened here. Dragging us back is what's happened. And again, I think everybody would say, pausing something and doing some consultation is not only harmless, but probably a good thing to do after a couple of years. But dragging us backwards to 1998 was not the right thing to do. I'm
interested in your advice to teachers because, as you well remember, the elementary teachers endorsed you in the last election campaign. They've now taken this government to court, making a charter argument that there are human rights issues at stake here by ditching the current sex ed curriculum. The government, however, is the government, and they do get the right to govern. They do get to choose. And if they say, we're going back to a different curriculum while we figure this all out, and if teachers say, well, that's all well and good, but we're going to do what we think is best, aren't the teachers wrong under those circumstances?
Well, I think there's something called the rights of children, and those are the people that should be primary here. It shouldn't be government that's primary. It shouldn't be, the educators that are primary. It should be the interests of the children. In fact,
we have legislation. Policy, though.
Well, but policy should always be based on the rights of the child. There's international covenants that talk about the rights of the child, and adults should always make policy and behave and deal with anything, using the rights of the child as the primary focus. And when you're talking about an environment where we see cyberbullying and where we see people, like kids, take their own lives, not somewhere in the States, but right here in Canada, kids take their own lives because of cyberbullying and because of being outed as LGBTQ youth or having come from an LGBTQ family. These are things that create real hazards for children if they're not dealt with in an open and thoughtful and supportive way. And so by dragging us backwards to a time where those things weren't discussed or supported, or where kids didn't have the tools that they need to protect themselves from things like cyberbullying, where consent was something that wasn't talked about at all, that is not putting the rights of the child or the interests of the child first. And so I would say that it is appropriate for whether it's educators, whether it's families, because some families are taking the government to court as well, to have that public discussion and debate over who is it that should be the primary concern in this discussion. And it shouldn't be Mr. Ford's social conservatives that got him elected as leader and then as premier. And it shouldn't be his well-connected insiders that talk to him in the back rooms and get him to make these changes. And it shouldn't necessarily be the educators per se in and of themselves, but what it should be is the children. It should be the children. And that's what I think is missing in this entire debate.
I've blown this here because I've spent too much time on this, which leaves us only a few minutes to talk about the downsizing of Toronto City Council. But I thought it was worth spending the extra time on those issues. Okay, given that we haven't got too much time left here, let me ask this. There's only 6 weeks to go until the municipal election. And I get that you don't like the process, the way this was brought down with no consultation, et cetera, et cetera. And I understand how disruptive it is to go from 47 to 25 members for the new election for council. Having said that, we are where we are. If the judge comes back and says this thing was illegal and they've got to go back to the original 47, how concerned are you about making a difficult situation even more chaotic?
Well, I mean, I think if that's what the judge says, and we're going to have to wait and see, but if that's what the judge says, then I think it's incumbent upon everyone at City Council and at City Hall, rather, and at the legislature to try to facilitate an election that that is well run, that people are able to not only run in terms of being candidates, but also able to vote and know who they're voting for, what their ward boundaries are, and all of that. And if that means there needs to be adjustments to that process, then so be it. But if the judge does rule in that way, it shows that that there was a meddling with democracy, fundamental democracy in our country, that our province undertook under Mr. Ford's leadership that was inappropriate. And I don't think that that's a bad thing if that's the response. And if there's chaos as a result, then I'd rather have democracy upheld and chaos ensue than the democracy be put to the wayside and not have any resolution.
Is there any part of you that says, I don't like the process, I don't like the way they got there, but a 25-member Toronto City Council actually probably would work more efficiently and more effectively than a 47-member council?
Well, and I think that's a decision that the people of Toronto need to make in a proper process and consultation. I mean, look, I came from a city that was amalgamated forcibly by the last Conservative government, and some were for it, some were against it, but there was considerable discussion and debate, and again, at the end of the day, some agreed, some didn't, but we undertook it, and now we are, years later, still functioning as an amalgamated city with 16 councillors, as opposed to, or 15 plus the mayor, as opposed to, what would have been, dozens with the regional model. Okay, so the point is, it's not a fast and hard number. 25, 47. 32, 26. I mean, who knows what the number is? It is actually all in the process. I mean, people have a right to participate in what their democracy looks like, as well as participating in the democratic process.
In our last 30 seconds here, can you tell me one thing you think the Ford government has done so far that you're okay with?
Well, I should have come prepared for that question because I know you well, Steve. But I, off the top of my head, I can't. I mean, when you think about the rollbacks of the pilot project for basic income, the safe injection sites, or the harm reduction sites, all of those things, the curriculum, the process for the changes to City Council. I mean, the list goes on. And now we have a number of lawsuits that have been filed against the province. One they've already lost, and that was to Tesla.
Yep.
And so, it's been very tumultuous, and I await the moment when I have the aha moment when I can say, I actually agree with that.
And we'll be waiting. We'll be waiting. We'll have you back. We'll talk about that. Andrea Horwath, who is now the leader of Her Majesty's Loyal Opposition here at TVO on the 28th anniversary to the day of the election of the so far one and only NDP government in Ontario history. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Steve.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.